I don't think that at any time that any of us have been working within the energy industry, that the markets have been as unpredictable as they are right now.
Hello and welcome to our True Insights discussion today, where we explore some of the key energy and sustainability challenges for a specific industry sector. My name's Chris McLean and I have the honour of hosting today's discussion. And the sector that we're going to be focusing on today is really interesting. It is one of the fastest growing industries globally. It is one of the most energy intensive. It is one of the most dynamic, progressive, and in many ways pioneering when it comes to energy strategies, net zero, and procurement. It is, of course, data centers. Now at OEM, we manage almost 2 terawatt hours of data center volume across Europe. And in data center language, that is just over 200 megawatts of consuming IT load. We manage the enterprise to the hyperscale and have built up a lot of experience and expertise in this sector. And talking of expertise, I am delighted to be joined today by some of the leading minds at open energy market when it comes to data centers. To my left, we have Jonathan Anstey, who heads up the sustainability side of the business. Welcome, Johnny.
Hi, Chris. Very much looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Across the table from me, we have Rory Cairns, who is our Director of Risk Management.
Morning, Chris. Yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Morning, Rory. And over the table from me, we have Johnny Rich, who is the Head of Data Center Partnerships. Morning, Johnny.
Morning, Chris. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Now, gents, one of the things I find most interesting about this sector is not just the speed of growth, but the manner in which these data centers have to grow to balance out competitive advantage, energy availability, energy cost, and of course, most importantly, sustainability, long-term sustainability. Because as such a prevalent energy-intensive sector, the eyes of the world are really looking at them to lead change in sustainable growth. So there's a lot to get stuck into today. So let's crack on. So the first thing I want to discuss is that competitive advantage, which is the core of what we try and support our data centers with ultimately. Why is competitive advantage so important without getting into the bleeding obvious? And what feeds it from an energy perspective?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot to unpack when looking at competitive advantage. And I think the first place to start is to probably sort of set the scene and understand that for data centers, typically energy isn't a direct cost for data centers. Unlike many businesses within the UK, where if you're manufacturing something or you're working in a hospitality sector, if energy prices increase, that's a direct impact onto that business's bottom line because they have to pay those energy costs themselves. That's typically not the case with data centers. So with data centers, instead, most commonly, it'll be the customers of those data centers who are paying for those energy costs. So it's a pass-through cost to their customers. But despite that, so despite the fact that energy isn't a direct cost to those customers, it's still vitally important that they structure it in a proper strategic way. They take all of the proper due diligence to ensure they are getting the best possible prices from the most renewable sources, because there's a very strong indirect cost to data centers. And that really comes from that question over competitive advantage. We know a lot from the work that we've had with our customers to date, is that often when you've bought a significant amount of capacity, so you have a data center that's live and they've committed to a 50 megawatt site, they need to fill that 50 megawatt site with customers, and customers want to know, where's my power come from? How renewable is my power? Have I got additionality on my power? And not to confuse people with too many terms right now, we'll get into the details of this a little bit later on. But these are questions that customers want to know straight off the bat. Now, there's a lot of challenges in terms of how they can do that, particularly at the period when they are starting to ramp up. But this is something which is hugely important to data centers, to be able to make sure that they can provide that information to their customers and that their customers are getting the best possible deals from the best possible sources. So we do a lot of work with our customers, not just understanding the needs of the data centers themselves, but also of the customers that are going to fit into those data centers and are going to be buying some of that capacity from the data center. So that goes from everything from making sure they've got the right supply contracts in place, assessing what renewable power opportunities they're looking at, right the way to doing some work over assessing where data centers can be built, because that's really one of the first fundamental questions that data center operators are looking at now, is where should I be building my sites?
Because different areas in Europe attract different costs.
Absolutely, and not just in Europe. I mean, we're seeing huge growth within the South African market, for example. Significant tax incentives to be building data centers within South Africa at the moment. South Africa is a very strategically important place for data centers. It connects most of Europe with Asia, Africa, and the US. It's a very strategically advantageous place to be operating a data center, but everyone knows about the grid reliability issues that you face within that country, and the fact that currently South Africa gets 80% of its generation from coal. So when you have these large sort of hyperscale customers where renewable energy is so important, that has to be balanced out against all of these other factors. So I think the point that we need to make is that there are so many different moving parts when you look at this. It's not a simple out-of-the-box solution. Things really need to be looked at a lot more strategically. When entering into these discussions, businesses really need to be looking at the sort of 5-10-year horizon and making sure that all of these decisions are made within that proper structured framework.
And when you look at that longer term horizon, then the opportunity for sustainability comes into play quite significantly, doesn't it? Because obviously you can do some short term stuff, but there's a much more interesting long term investments you can make to supply yourself with renewable power.
Yeah, sure. Just picking up on the question specific to competitive advantage, I think one of the interesting points that Rory raised there is the decoupling, if you like, of the cost impact, given that it's not always a direct cost to a data center operator. So a key area where they can create and or maintain that competitive advantage is through sustainability initiatives. And given that the customers of the data center operators themselves do typically bear that cost, they are in a greater position to demand that sustainability piece, the environmental. And we see that in publicly stated targets across the data center operators, be they individual corporate levels or as an industry as a whole. So, for example, by 2025, 75% of energy consumed by data centers needs to be renewable and or carbon free, increasing to 100% by 2030. That's from the Climate Change
Stringent
Data Center
targets.
Pact, which is, if you compare that to the European Union or Europe as a continent, their target is net zero by 2050. So sustainability really is at the core and the centre of building and keeping that competitive advantage in this space, in my mind.
Yeah, I think it brings back to what Chris was saying at the start. I mean, I think that's why data centers are so interesting to us, because it puts us in I think a very natural fit between, one of the sort of forward-thinking, leading, innovative industries, and OEM. I mean, that's why we entered into the market, was to take advantage of this changing, evolving, rapidly modernizing market. There's just so many exciting opportunities for the industry.
One of the phrases I've heard a lot within the data center world is PUE, or power usage effectiveness. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the majority of impact that can be had on a PUE comes from the cooling, or the ability to cool effectively in a data center. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. So the power demand of a data center is driven by cooling the servers, and that's where the demand comes from. So in data center design, if you like, and some of the considerations around sustainability, a key part of that is having the greatest efficiency of the energy that is used, and then beyond that, layering on top the renewable energy solutions through power purchase agreements and private wires and microgrids, some of the stuff that we'll get onto later. But primarily is making the energy that is used on site as efficient as possible, which is through improving that PUE score.
So if cooling plays such a massive part in the total efficiency of a building, why are we not seeing all data centers in the Arctic Circle, as an example? Johnny, jump in.
A really good question. I mean, location plays such a massive role for these guys. It's why you do get quite a few in the Nordic states. Obviously, the ambient temperatures lower cooling demand, lower PUE. It's really easy, but there's always going to be grid capacity issues wherever you are, which is why they can't all be in one location, unfortunately. As much as it would make sense, it's just not feasible.
Yeah, I'm glad we managed to get through that section without anyone making a joke about the Scottish weather, so I appreciate it.
Just on that, before we move on, one of the exciting things that I've seen developing with regards to heat and data centres is heat recovery and using some of that excess heat from data centres to feed district heating schemes and effectively providing heat for residential or neighbouring commercial activities, which is a really neat solution.
It's a brilliant idea that needs to be thought about really at the planning stages of all big developments, which is kind of where it's falling down a little bit at the moment, because trying to get planning permission for a data centre itself is difficult enough, let alone trying to get planning permission for a data centre as well as however many commercial buildings or houses. It's just that added level of complication, but it's definitely where I think the industry wants to go. They want to be able to
So we now look
push
at
that heat.
additionality, not just being in the form of renewable energy, but in the form of how a data centre can support a local community.
Yes, exactly that.
And be seen to be a power for good rather than a drain on a resource.
Yeah,
but I think there's an opportunity to do that, given I think we're under no illusions around the table and beyond the table that data centres are going to increase and their load will increase, given where we're going with data, tech, AI. So if we can do the things now that allow us to better build and design from scratch, from a blank canvas, these facilities, then it could be a great thing for the future that can transcend into other sectors.
So with so many data centers coming online, one of the most challenging phases of bringing a new data center onto the grid is the ramp up process and being able to forecast that. You may well, as a data center, have sold the space to a large hyperscale customer, which is fantastic, but you at that time sacrifice the understanding or the forecast ability of how much energy that customer, what demand that customer is going to put on the data center at any one point. Mm-hmm. So how do we overcome that lack of ability to forecast, and how does it affect sustainability strategies? How does it affect energy buying? How do we overcome that?
Yeah. So I think with the ramp up, probably the first thing that we need to cover is what are the problems that causes and why is it a problem? So the big challenge that happens with a ramp up is, as you've covered, you've got a large hyperscale customer who's moved into a large data center. Now, we've seen ourselves that it can take as long as 2, sometimes 3 years for that customer to move into that data center and then start using all of that available capacity. I mean, often they never even end up getting close to the available capacity in total. So there's quite a long period of time where volumes are very uncertain. And typically during that ramp up process, as well as the general uncertainty over the volumes, there's often a lot of testing which takes place. So the data centers will be sort of running everything at maximum capacity to test the ability to take that strain onto the market. So you can be seeing anywhere from a data consuming 1 or 2 megawatts one day to consuming 20 or 30 megawatts the next day. Now that causes huge difficulties from what's called a balancing perspective, because I think businesses, when they're looking at buying energy, they often consider what's happening from the customer to the supplier, but don't really consider what's happening from the supplier to the grid. Because what you have to remember is that during that process, when you're committing to buy power from a supplier, the supplier also has to commit to taking that power from the grid. So when you've got those huge volumetric uncertainties that you have during that ramp-up process, it really limits the type of product offering first of all, that the supplier will be able to offer to those customers. Looking at a fixed price contract, for example, when you take a fixed price contract from a supplier, you're making a commitment to buy a certain amount of volume between a fixed start date and a fixed end date. And the price that's negotiated will appear for the whole duration of that fixed price contract. That can't really be done during that ramp up period because you don't know how much volume you're going to be committing to. So if a supplier was pricing up that fixed price contract, they would make sure that they're covering off all of that volumetric uncertainty by increasing the margin on the contract. Those fixed prices become very, very expensive. Even putting in place what would be called a volumetric, sort of volume tolerance contract are really difficult during that ramp up perspective, because even getting a customer to commit to sort of their volumes within a 10 or 20% tolerance is almost impossible, and we've seen that during the ramp ups that we've been through recently. So I've sort of maybe created a bit of a description of how difficult that issue is. It's not to say that things can't be done within there. There are solutions to it, but it's just the point I think we need to make is that it's really important to understand all of the various different contract offerings, the risks and rewards and benefits of each individual approach, and making sure that you are putting in place the right type of contract for your data center. So typically what we've seen is contracts such as cash out contracts, where you've got the option to be able to take a lot of spot price exposure, where you're taking the sort of near term market prices as opposed to longer term hedges, are often a much better fit for those customers that are on the ramp up. But as well as the issue over putting in place a supply contract, another big issue that we've seen with the ramp up is the issue over buying renewable power. So when you're buying renewable power, and you can speak a little bit more to this, Jono, but there's a number of different ways in which you can buy renewable power. You can buy, REGO or renewable REC certificates to be able to cover it off. You can have some on-site generation, which typically isn't a particularly good fit for the data centers themselves, or you can have private wire or corporate PPA agreements with a sort of third-party corporate PPA provider. All of those have challenges during that ramp-up period because of that volumetric uncertainty.
I feel like you've just stolen Jono's
It won't be the last time.
Yeah, go on, Jono.
Yeah,
elaborate a little bit on that, because it is difficult to combine a sustainability strategy with a ramp-up phase, right?
Certainly not the first time. Thanks, Rory. I think by their very nature, the volumetric uncertainty and volatility that Rory just has articulated there doesn't particularly lend itself well to sustainability or renewables. By their very nature, renewables, if we think about a power purchase agreement, the planning, the connections, the construction of the negotiation, etc. Well, it's common for that to be done 3, 4, sometimes even 5 years ahead of the COD, so renewable parlance there, the commercial operation date of a renewable asset. So where they can maybe be of assistance is to take some of the strain, if you like, away from the base load 2-3 years into the future, and just leave the balance of the demand and that volatility for the risk specialists to put that ball back in your court, Rory. But just by their nature of time taken for assets to come on load, renewables will struggle to solve the puzzle presented by data center ramp up, but can certainly play their part further down the line.
I think I think Rory's done a really good job there of presenting exactly how complex that ramp-up period is for data centres, and why we don't always have renewable technology thought about right at the beginning of a data centre's lifespan, because it just cannot help with that massive variation in power load. But like Jono says, it's a great option to be thinking about for further down the line. But the ramp-up period is just so difficult for people to compute exactly how much load they need at any given time.
I guess as well, again, it comes back to geography and the siting of a data centre. I'm just imagining a scenario where a new build data centre that would experience that ramp-up, if it's built close to an existing generation asset, so be that wind, solar farm, there may well be opportunity for a private wire PPA, which is effectively a private connection to that asset that takes it off grid, and it would almost certainly be advantageous to the generator or the seller of that power to sell as much as possible of that power to the data center operator, rather than export to grid and probably get a typical price. So there could be some economic drivers or motivators there that would allow existing assets that are in close-ish proximity to the data center to help with that ramp-up period.
Yeah, I think an important thing to consider here is that there's two things that need to be done at the same time. You need to be looking both at that longer term strategy that we've been speaking about, so having in place a 5, 10, 15-year strategic plan for how you're going to eventually ramp up and bring in all of these interesting and more complex type of contracts. But you also, during that ramp up period, have to have a short term strategy, and the tools that you use during that short term strategy are often very different from the tools that you use during that long term strategy. I think we've covered that putting in place those longer term corporate PPAs are not a good fit during that ramp up period, but then there are solutions for that during that short term period. That is when you can start to look at, RECs, REGOs, certificates, which are certificates that would cover that show that the power that's been provided to the site has at some stage come from a renewable source. There's a lot of complex questions over additionality and how green are those certificates. It's not the ideal end goal where you want to be able to end up, but it is a good short-term measure to be able to sort of green up the power that you are having to the site during that difficult ramp-up period.
I guess also subject to sort of market forces and prices, those certificates, to use an umbrella term, are widely available at any time. So that's a solution that can be used.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we seeing a lot of demand across the industry for REGOs, for RECs, guarantees of origin in the data center world?
There is quite a bit of demand, but obviously there is a reputational issue occasionally, well, more with carbon offsetting than RECs and REGOs, but carbon offsetting is one of the things that has been done within the industry to try and
alleviate some of that pressure.
To try and alleviate some of the pressure when they are going through the ramp up period.
Yep. Okay, so we've located the site. We've gone through the ramp up phase. We now get to a point where we're at a stable load, and we've got hopefully a full data center, a lot of happy customers. What's the next step in terms of driving that competitive advantage from the point of view of sustainability? What should a data center be looking at once they've got that guarantee of load and demand to really push themselves ahead of the pack?
Well, in my mind, and you wouldn't, you would expect me to say this, but it would be the early sourcing of long-term power purchase agreements. And the reason I say that is we've touched in this discussion already on how we foresee as an industry it growing, power demand across data centers increasing regionally. We've spent a lot of time at Open Energy Markets sourcing CPPAs, corporate power purchase agreements, for data center customers, and a trend that we have seen just become more and more apparent is the scarcity of some of these longer term large corporate PPAs that are available. Typically they'll be linked to solar and wind assets, but it's certainly my view that the demand for those solutions and products is far greater than the supply of them, and it's not a supply that can readily and immediately be turned up to meet that demand. So in my view, there's going to be an upward price pressure on corporate PPAs, something that we've seen already. So just linking back to the competitive advantage piece, I think if those contracts can be sought and agreed earlier, I think there will be a price advantage there for those off takers, for the early adopters, if you will.
And what's the availability of these big power purchase agreements? I mean, some of these data centers, one site maybe 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts.
Yeah.
How much availability is there? How much supply of large corporate PPAs, and what technology would you look at? I assume not solar at that level, but
Yeah, in terms of technology, it's a mix. When you're buying power at that scale, the most prevalent corporate PPAs, certainly in Europe, are solar and wind assets. There's some hydro in there, but the front two certainly solar and wind. Yeah, so there is availability of projects for sure, but the key separation point is when those assets come online. It's common now where we are Q4 2023 to not see some of these larger projects that are going to be suited to a data centre, by which I'm talking 100 gig plus per annum generation, solar and wind across Europe, not coming online until 2028, and it's conceivable that within that 5-year period that there might be delays. So realistically, in terms of risk and strategising, we might be looking at a 5 to 6 year lag until these assets come on. There is plenty of existing assets available that are out there that are coming off subsidy, that are available through some of the mainstream suppliers, but they are considered secondary in terms of importance because they don't carry that additionality aspect. So the off-taker is unable to claim that their contractual commitment or their contract, if you like, has directly led to the building of new renewable energy assets, and that's key in this space. So the answer is mixed, if you like. There is availability of renewable power, but in terms of what we see data center operators wanting, those long-term new assets, they are absolutely, I would say, in short supply, and I don't see that improving anytime soon.
And that's a real worry for people. I mean, even over in Ireland, they're predicting that by 2028, that the overall grid capacity, 30% of that will be used by data centres in 2028. And if you can't bring on renewables in a fast way, then something is going to have to provide that power. The data centres aren't going to stop growing. As you mentioned earlier, John, there's just so much going on at the moment that's driving that growth, that if the renewables can't keep up, power has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, it's my view that we'll just see that translated to an increase in price for renewable power as that renewable label carries greater importance. The price of it will increase as, for those that are willing to meet that price tag.
And again, it all feeds through into that balance of risk as well, doesn't it? So you've got, it's great that we can source and we can identify and source these fantastic projects, these CPPAs, but they carry a price tag, and a 10, 15-year price tag, sometimes linked to RPI, sometimes not, sometimes fixed, and they've got to be fed into the whole risk profile of the data center, because ultimately that will determine the end price that the customers have to pay. So Rory, tell us a bit more about how we bring in the CPPAs to feed your risk model and the sort of output pricing.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of coming back to why I was saying that there's so many moving parts with all of this. It is such a complex situation because on the one hand you've got this absolute requirement to be able to bring on significant amounts of renewable power onto sites where we've seen that there's often limited availability of that renewable power. But even for businesses that have been successful in doing so, the question then is that the right thing to do financially, economically? Is putting in place that renewable asset actually going to provide value for you as a customer? And that really at the moment, I suppose, is the $64,000 question. And I wish I was able to answer whether a 10 or 15 year PPA was going to provide long-term value. But the truth is it's impossible to be able to do so. Sort of sitting around the table now, we must be knocking on the door of 60 years of experience between between us in terms of experience within the energy industry. I don't think that at any time that any of us have been working within the energy industry that the markets have been as unpredictable as they are right now. Trying to forecast where energy prices will be in 1 or 2 years' time is trying to get inside the mind of Putin, understanding what's going to happen within the Middle East, what's going to happen with the ongoing French nuclear crisis that we're seeing affecting European power. There are so many complexities right now with the markets that trying to provide an accurate or detailed forecast for 1 or 2 years in the future is nigh on impossible, and trying to get that 10 or 15, 20 year picture is just almost impossible to be able to do. So businesses really now need to be, in the absence of being able to have a predictable or reliable forecast to do, it's really important that those data centers scenario plan for what happens in various different situations. So if you've got a long-term PPA contract sleeved into your contract and affecting a large volume of it, what's the impact to your business if prices do move against you? So if you lock that in at a price of, let's say, 70 or 80 pounds a megawatt hour, what's the impact to the business and to your customers if market prices then fall down to 50 pounds per megawatt hour or 40 pounds per megawatt hour? Business really need to be starting to ask these questions and almost being prepared for the worst. So you need to scenario plan these situations and say, if the market prices do move against us in that way, is our strategy still viable? And that's where we've been doing a lot of work with our customers in terms of making sure that all of this stuff is structured in much more of a sort of properly structured process, which balances all of those risks, your upside risk and your downside.
Do you think we're going to get to a point where data centers need to get the buy-in of their customer base to share that risk with them, so that the data center can't be held wholly accountable for, ultimately trying to achieve net zero or bringing in these renewable projects, but increasing their risk as they do so?
Yep.
So they will need, especially in the hyperscale world, they might need to get the buy-in of their customers, long-term buy-in to guarantee that they're not going to lose that competitive advantage for doing the right thing, and that's ultimately what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we already are seeing that, rather than that's going to be something that we're going to see in the future. We know with working with our data center customers at the moment, there's a lot of direct communication with those customers, because when customers come in, again, they've got these competing demands over what's the price and what's the renewable power. And it's no longer such a straightforward question over what is your price going to be, or what sort of power are you going to be coming in there. When you've got so much volatility within the markets right now, customers do need to be bearing some of the brunt of that risk. If you want to go down a route where you want to be able to provide additionality and you want to bring in some real good quality renewable power, you need to accept the risk that by doing so you need to be committing to a longer term contract at a fixed price. Potentially, I know there are other options where PPAs can be sleeved in on the sort of spot market, but as a general rule, a longer term PPA contract comes with it significant amounts of market risk, and I think that absolutely we're moving in a direction where customers will have to start bearing some of that risk.
We talk about it negatively, but there's obviously a huge positive impact or potential impact there. If we see the if we wind the clocks back a year or so ago, when we were in the midst of the energy crisis, having 70% of your energy covered by a PPA at £85 a megawatt hour would be fantastic. So, yeah. Well,
yeah, absolutely. So I think on that's what we spend so much time with our customers in terms of understanding that what are the wider objectives of the business, and it isn't just upside risk or downside risk that has to be managed at any one point in time. You need to be managing both of them. You need to have a strategy that works, that will work if market prices are rising, and it will work if market prices are falling. And there are ways to be able to do that. There are ways to be able to structure your contracts in a strategic way that allows you to be able to have a strategy that will work regardless of what direction the market is moving in.
I think just going back to what you were saying about the customers needing to take on board some of the risk, it's really, I think you're right, but it's a really difficult thing when people want computer processing power has been so prolific. If you just want to store photos somewhere, you don't think, oh, that's going to add power load to a server somewhere. You can just upload your photos from your home. And even corporate clients, they are so used to already having just storage at their disposal whenever they want it, almost being able to switch it on and off on a whim. It's really going to have to change the way that consumers think about data, and maybe a bit of an educational piece about the impact that upscaling, downscaling their data usage has. The industry just hasn't been positioned in that way to people. It's all been about convenience. It's all been about being able to take it or leave it whenever you want it, and to have that security of those longer term prices. Like Rory says, you need that longer term planning, and that's just not necessarily there in the market at the moment. But it is something I think that's going to need to come.
So you're saying there's a role, an educational role for a data center. Yeah,
definitely. I think trying to get the clients on side and explaining why they need to come on side from a sustainability angle is definitely something that needs to happen for sure.
Yeah. So to conclude, there's a lot for data center operators to be thinking about, as I'm sure they're very aware of, from the ramp up to the general operation and feeding in these aggressive sustainability strategies, which fits very nicely with the platform that we've built, which is True. So it might be worth just touching on how True can support a data center in looking at the sustainability strategies and how they might work during either a ramp up or during a period of flat demand, and how it can really benefit a data center in making the difficult decisions that they're going to all have to be faced with in the near term future.
For me, I think the key there is it will allow True will allow a data center to see and plan from a cost and carbon perspective how best to deploy their capital into sustainability strategies. So they're typically, and we'll see this across various industries, but increasingly so within data centers, given the demand. True will give them an ability to scenario plan effectively. What would the impact be of X installation versus Y installation, and best map out in what order to deploy certain technologies that would allow the savings effectively to be reinvested into the subsequent step in their journey towards net zero. So it would, in essence, it will give some surety and verification to what would otherwise potentially be quite a disparate net zero piece. It would bring all of those potential projects and also existing projects together and formulate that into a plan.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. Is if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, you were dealing with a business who was looking at procurement, sustainability, net zero, and any sort of on-site assets which they were looking to provide. They would have typically been dealt with by very different areas of the business. That you'd have procurement sat over in one area of the business, and sustainability, net zero emissions sat in a completely different area of the business. I think what we're trying to steer our customers to more, and it's a change that we're seeing right the way across the market, is that they can't be thought of as independent of one another anymore. They should be two parts of a whole rather than two individual aspects of the strategy. So it's really important now that businesses do bring everything together into one place. If you're looking at your sustainability net zero ambitions, there's now so many opportunities there to be able to do that in a really financially beneficial way, and it needs to be tied in with what you're doing on the procurement. There's a lot of things that we didn't get the opportunity to talk about today, but with national grid incentives for businesses who have on-site assets, for example, where that can be used to be able to provide additional revenue for businesses. So I think it's just really important now to be able to have that one place where you can bring all of these quite complex things together, and in a nice, easy and simplified manner.
I think the simplification is the real benefit. The procurement for a data center is not an easy task, as I think you've laid out pretty well. It's just being able to have that scenario planning that Jono spoke about and the procurement visually all in one place, and to see that at any point in a data center's life cycle exactly what's happening with that procurement is just going to be so beneficial for the guys working on it.
I think also as well, if and when a particular project is decided on, or even before that point, True will allow you to analyse the various ways of financing or funding that solution. So whether it be through capital expenditure, long-term leasing arrangements where title passes at the end, or be it through third-party investor funding through power purchase agreement, looking at how those three options interplay against one another, and which benefits are brought at which point in time is something quite unique that I've not seen elsewhere, and certainly the feedback we've had from customers has been along those lines.
And the unique way that the procurement plays into all of that, so you can see clearly what's going on at any point, is just absolutely critical for them to be able to see the payback on those.
So one of the things I understand is at the forefront of data center operators at the moment is the Energy Efficiency Directive that is coming in soon. Johnny, can you tell us a bit more about this and what impact it's going to have on data centers?
Yes, so the European Union has been debating this for quite a while, and now there's going to be some real stringent reporting that data centers have to adhere to, all about their not actually all about their energy usage, it's also about wastewater usage, and are they utilising any waste heat, as we spoke about earlier. But it's really tied in to try and reduce the energy usage by sort of 11.7%, and contribute to a 55% cut in carbon emissions by 2030. They've got some real stringent targets coming in, and it's going to play a real big role for data centers in Europe. It's, I think, everyone over 1 megawatt usage has to report on this, and it's all the standard things like you spoke about earlier, like the PUE and cooling, as well as the holistic look as well, which is big.
And that's only going to add to the demand for renewable assets and those
100%
PPA type contracts, given those regulatory pressures that they face.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think that's been. I think we've covered a heck of a lot there. We've covered a lot, and hopefully that has been informative, educational, maybe in some areas. But yeah, it's a complex industry, and it's one, as I said before, right at the beginning. It's pioneering in so many ways, because there's a lot of pressure on the industry externally to lead. So yeah, I think we've covered a lot, and hopefully that's been really useful.